Welcome to Solo Sailing with Trev White, and today we'll talk about being back in New Zealand and boat jobs. So TINTIN has been on the hard for about 4 months when I was over in Europe and then in Victoria. I arrived back and overall TINTIN's in pretty good shape, but there's a few challenges that I have ahead to get TINTIN back in the water and get ready to sail north. So come back, it's a nice day. Boatyard looks good. TINTIN looks pretty good. And I had a lot of covers on TINTIN. I covered the dinghy. I covered up the timber work on the boat as best I could. Dropped all the shades, protected all the sails, ripped all the head sails off to protect them. Leaving the boat for a period of time. You never know what sort of weather you're going to get. I mean, New Zealand did experience a cyclone a few years ago. So I got on and I've been travelling all night from Melbourne. Flew back into Whangarei. Caught a little shuttle bus down to the hard. And it was a bit pooped, but thought I'll get in, I'll open the boat up, give it a clean. So got on board. I've been using just a step ladder, like a 20-foot step ladder. Dragged all my boat bags up the side of the boat and opened the boat up, which was good. It was all, as I expected it to be. Cleared some of the awnings and covers out of the way. And opened the boat. It looked pretty good, didn't smell too bad. Like often when you leave your boat for a period of time, you get on board and it smells terrible. It's generally mould or something, and it didn't smell too bad. So I opened up all the windows, got everything open, got the air going, got the fans on, start moving a lot more air around. And I'd had a couple of windows open that were protected so air could move through the boat. But I didn't have any fans running or anything like that when I left it. What I did do, though, is I went through all the bilges, drained all the bilges, sponged all the water out of them. So the bilges were spotlessly dry before I left. And that's how I expected to find them when I came back. And most were. So I had a quick look through, and but then, I found water in the engine bilge, which was a bit confronting because there shouldn't be water in the engine bilge. I'm trying to think, is there water in the engine bilge because one of the hatches is leaking and water's, settling into that bilge. I mean, it's quite a deep bilge, but I left it on as well. So theoretically, it shouldn't have been sitting there. But it's also one of the reasons I leave the boat on the hard. I don't leave the boat in the water. If something goes wrong, your boat can sink. If something goes wrong on the hard, well, it's not that big a deal. But so I left that to ponder a moment and went through the rest of the boat, and then I started to find, there'd been a couple of little leaks in the boat where water had got in through one of the top hatches, and a whole pile of clothes in a basket were, been getting wet and they were covered in mould. So there's, quite a lot of clothes, towels, a few other things needed to be thrown out. Cushions needed to be scrubbed to get the mould off. So I was using vinegar and a bit of bleach. Since moved more to just straight vinegar. Cleaned, went through the boat, cleaning all the mould off the ceilings, and there was quite a bit of mould on the timber work down low, and I tend to get that every time I come back. I come back to the boat, and I normally find there's mould on the timber work and underneath surfaces. So I went around with my spray bottle, spraying everything with vinegar and bleach, and then let that settle, go back around again with the same solution, clean all the mould, then go back around with spray and wipe to make it smell better and to clean again. So progressively spent a few hours just cleaning, and I didn't have a car at that stage, so I just got the shuttle from the airport. Hadn't even thought about hiring cars. The boatyard is about 5 k's from Whangarei Township, 4 or 5 k's, so it's a little bit of a trot. So opened up the cupboards to see what I had, and I think I was looking at some corned beef spag bowl. That was the plan for dinner, I think. So pulled those out, put them on the plates. Still had plenty of water in the tanks. Water still tasted good, and progressively kept cleaning, throwing stuff over the side that was unsavable, identifying stuff that was washable. There's a lot of clothes that were just ruined beyond repair, but that's life. Gives you a chance to update. And cushions up on the deck, get the air into them, open everything up, work out where I was going to sleep. Still a bit stuffy in the boat and a bit of mould in the back cabin, so cleaned all that, and then decided I was just going to sleep in the main cabin with a lot of air, and it was still a warm day. And then I decided to tackle the water in the bilge issue. It was about, I suppose, 5 o'clock, and I worked out that the water had come from the heat exchanger. So I had water in the header tank, or coolant actually. So what was in the actual bilge wasn't water, it was coolant. So yeah, that made me even more worried. So did I have a hole in the engine block somewhere? Did I have a hole in the header tank, or had I just been a bad seal? You know, sometimes seals fail or a hose lets go. So I started progressively working my way around and put a bit of coolant into the header tank to try and follow that. And then I found that there was a little drip around the vicinity of the drain plug on the bottom of the header tank. So had a look at that more, and then found that what I thought was a drip from the drain plug, and there was also been a drip from the drain plug coming back from Fiji, which hadn't really thought about it, just topped it up. I figured to pull the drain plug out and put a better seal on it. But in actual fact, it was corrosion in the around the drain plug, in the body of the header tank. And I also had corrosion at the back of the drain plug, which went into the exhaust outlet portion of the header tank. So you had the water reservoir for coolant, and then I had the exhaust manifold for water and, or not for water, but for exhaust gases. So I had a hole leaking into that side as well, which was a major pain in the arse. And yeah, so that set up dinner. Worked out at least where to start from. Got a little pick, started picking, and yeah, the holes got dramatically fucking bigger. So had 3, holes about the size of my little fingernail, which wasn't great, and position was really difficult to address those. So packed all that up for the night, made dinner, and yeah, that was my first day back on the boat. And high being back, low of finding a expensive portion of your engine that wasn't going to be able to function. So yeah, I was very disappointed about that. But made dinner on the boat, just some spag bowl out of corned beef, and sat down, had that, and just fell asleep. I was pretty exhausted. Got up in the morning to a new day, another sunny day in Whangarei. It was a little bit cooler, but weather wasn't too bad. So I thought I'd just keep working around the boat. So I got off the boat and had a good look around, and what needed to be done. Started readdressing my list that I'd prepared. So yeah, these are the things that needed to be looked at, and also what I had to address. So I had still had some mould issues I needed to get up. So I need to get the floorboards up and treat any mould underneath the floorboards. Get on top of that. The heat exchanger, I needed to get that looked at. I had a lot of dirt scum on the top side, so because it's a boatyard and they're always cleaning and grinding and other things going on in the boatyard. I had really sticky, dirty scum on the tops of the boats. I had 4 brand new fenders, which are now look disgusting. So I'm glad I covered everything in tarps. Top sides are a bit grimy. I had some brand new white plastic vents, which are covered in scum as well. That pissed me off a bit. And solar panels needed to be cleaned also. That was just cleaning, and I managed to clean some of that with acetone. I needed to dress my new mainsail, so I'd give some measurements to a sail maker. I needed to also address brand new chain, so I needed to change the chain on my boat, either to get it re-galvanised or new chain, and really I'd looked at new chain because I wanted more chain than I had. I had 60 metres and I wanted 100 metres minimum. As I got down around the boat, I was looking around, and I had to... the keel was a lot worse than I recalled. So in addition to being taken down to bare metal on the bottom, where I had a bit of a touch-up with some reef or rock, not quite sure at the time, but it was very pockmarked in areas, and I don't know whether that's a result of losing paint or the result of anodes. So I then decided I needed to grind all the paint off the keel and re-prime and put some basic filler on the keel to build it up, and then anti-foul it. So yeah, that was another job that I added to the list, which I hadn't anticipated. I thought I'd just do a little touch-up and anti-foul, and I probably could have, but you get the time to do it, you might as well do it properly. So that was going to become a bigger job than I anticipated. I also had to rebuild timber rails around the boat that had been ripped off in the storm. I had to get the dodger off and get it repaired because it almost got ripped in half coming back from Fiji. I had to get the mizzen recut and I had a couple of sails previously repaired up in Apua when I arrived. I had to install some fans. I had to find a new freezer and install a new freezer because my last freezer died coming back from, and actually in Fiji, so I needed to look into that as well and find one that was going to fit in the space. So yeah, they were the jobs that I needed to do on Tintin, and there was plenty of other jobs that we're going to find myself. Like, actually, I was pretty happy. Like, come on board. I'd put some new lights on before I'd left. All the water pumps were working fine, which is really unusual. I normally come back and there's a water pump not working. Although the bilge pump, the deep bilge under the engine, that had stopped working. So, yeah, that wasn't very hard to fix. I ended up pulling it out and giving it a clean. So I think it was just covered in scum and it just got, a little bit seized up. And, it worked again fine. I'm still keeping an eye on that just to make sure if I need to replace it. I tend to find that it's a rule narrow access bilge pump and they don't last that long, but they're great. They push a lot of water and they're really good for narrow spaces. I've got a very narrow space at the bottom of the engine bilge, so it fits in there quite well. And it does move quite a bit of water very quickly, so it's not too bad. I'd also added 2 additional bilge pumps into parts of the boat which have been difficult to get to, and I decided I was sick of going down there with a sponge and a bucket, so I had 2 very tiny little whale gushers, I think, little whale pumps, tiny little things that you'd use like an inline pump on a tank. So I put those in these very narrow little tiny spots, and then I pushed that water to the forward bilge and the rear bilge, and depending on which pump it was on. So they were still working fine, and a couple of little bits of condensation in there I managed to just pump out easily, and then give it a wipe with a bit of paper towel. So overall, a lot of things were good, but I had a few leaking seals, like I had rubber seals on windows. End up taking opening up all those windows, giving them a good clean, and then re-greasing with rubber grease, which I find works quite well. Protects the rubber seals and tends to allow them to seal better. I also found that I had one of my hatches started to leak, so the hatch over the galley was bloody leaking. I'm not sure why. I think the silicone had just dried out, and that was also another problem. I've got silicone or some sort of compound underneath the boards on top of the hatches. So I've got aluminium with timber and then hatches on top of that over the galley and over the main hatch and over the head. So yeah, they've dried out dramatically being up in Fiji and Tonga, and they created some little leaks which are very difficult to find because they're tracking across aluminium and just finding their way through little tiny threads on screws and things. Not huge leaks, but it was enough to ruin a whole heap of clothing. So that was one of the problems that I'm going to have to address at some point. But overall, the next job is getting quotes. So I went to Dan, who runs the yard, and I asked him what trades are available, and I also had a broken door in the head. The door had got broken, and it needed to be rebuilt, and then the timber rails needed to be rebuilt. Not big jobs, but just easier when you got the right tools. So I went and got the chippy, or the yard cabinet maker, chippy / fiberglass guy to come over and quote, and he blew my fucking socks off with his quotes. So he wanted $2,000 to repair the door on the galley. He wanted another $2,000 to make up timber rails, and quoted 3 days for each. I mean, if he couldn't have built a brand new door in a day, I would stand fucked. And the timber rails, I would have thought there was probably a few hours in each one, particularly if you've got the right machinery. Like you got a bandsaw, you got a shaping bench. You can make things very quickly. All you can do is make up a couple of templates and then shape it, go back, check it, shape it, go back, and the second or third time it's probably going to fit perfectly. And same with the door. You pull some of the hardware off, pull it apart, replace a couple of pieces of timber, put it back together on a bench with a few vices, not vices, but clamps, and the next day it's done. But $2,000 a day or $2,000 a project, that was a little rich for me. And I also didn't think it was terribly great value. So I ended up talking to another guy who was a bit more of a contractor timber guy, who was a Japanese guy. And he thought he could do the door for a few $100s. He had some timber, not the same timber, like I've got teak doors, but he had a couple of pieces of New Zealand timbers which would match in very nicely, and once stained they'd fit perfectly. So, and yeah, so that was the door, you know, for a few $100s. All I need to do was get it off and get it to him. And then the timber rails, we sort of brainstormed it, and the best course of action we thought was to laminate some plywood. So instead of using solid hardwood, we got some marine grade plywood, cut it into 100mm strips, or 60mm strips actually, which was the widest point of the timber rubber rails. And then I put that on and I cut each piece narrower and narrower because it went from 60mm up to 20mm, and it was sort of an odd shape. But yeah, he ended up, you know, coming back with like a sheet of ply, cut it into different strips for me, run it through his bench saw, and you know, he just charged me for the sheet of ply and an hour's work, which I thought was very nice of him, and yeah, gave me a few tips on how he would approach it. So yeah, I basically started addressing the timber rails, which, you know, it still took me a few days because the way I was laminating it. So I was laminating plywood on top of plywood, gluing it on. So the previous ply was through-bolted into the hull, and that meant I would have had to rip all the internal timbers out of the hull, the kitchen out, to access those bolts, which is just, wasn't going to happen. So I ended up cutting the bolts off where the rails were, punching the bolts through what was left of them, and there was a big space behind each one. So now I have a couple of cut-off bolts in there, but they are stainless steel, and it's relatively dry in there, so shouldn't have any problems. I then patched each one with epoxy to seal all the holes, and made those flush or over flush on each side, so the patches are quite strong. And then I put a timber guide beam, like shaped it to the exact shape that I needed for the rub rail, right across, screwed that at every foot into the hull. So I patched all the larger holes where the bolts were, and then screwed into new self-tapping screws into the hull, and glued those timber rails on with some West Systems gluing compound. And then I started laminating timber rails onto each one of those previous timbers, and screwing and gluing and shaping. And yeah, after 3 days I had rails all the way around the boat, which were pretty good. You know, not perfect, but you know, I then spent a couple of days shaping and re-epoxying, building it up to get the shape I wanted. And then I primed it and painted it. So you can't tell unless you have a really close look. And my intent is to actually take all the timber rails off this boat and weld aluminium marine grade rub rails onto the boat. So I'm going to get some probably 80mm aluminium pipe, cut it in half, shape it at each end, and then run that around the boat as rub rails. That way I don't have the problem with timber anymore. Timber is a pain in the ass for rub rails on an aluminium boat. When it gets wet, it sucks water through, and over a long period of time, like if you're on one tack for a week, which, you know, occasionally happens, you know, and the rail's in the water, it starts to suck water in. And that's what caused problems on the paint. That's why I ripped all the paint off, because it was, you know, bringing moisture in underneath the paint, because of the way it had been painted. So getting rid of the timber rails for me would be an advantage, because I prefer to have a raw aluminium boat. It creates a lot less work. It's stronger, the timber. You know, if you are rubbing up against a pylon, and I did once in Eden in Victoria, it took the rail off in the middle of a storm, and then, you know, took about a foot out of that rail and took it down about an inch. And I was just rubbing, whereas aluminium, you know, would have ground it down a bit, but, you know, hit it with the angle grinder, it'd be smooth again and oxidise over. You wouldn't know it. So yeah, there's different ways to address these problems, but I don't think timber rails on an aluminium boat is the way to do it. I would go either straight aluminium rails, or I would go a synthetic compound, and there's plenty of those. When I was in the boat show recently in Dusseldorf in Germany, there's many companies that are producing synthetic rails, and they're like a Teflon material that you can bolt on, and they're quite strong. So if anything, I think I would probably do aluminium with maybe a Teflon cap over the top to make it less aggressive if you touch another boat. But you know, that's what Fender's for as well. So yeah, that's addressing the timber rails. That was it's a few days' work, but it come up all right. Got some tow rails, antique tow rails. I've got a few chips in them from just boat life and wharves, so I had to go around and clean some of those up. Yeah, pressure washed the teak rails and then re-oiled all that, re-oiled all the top sides again. So he did a lot of the oiling while the decks were still a bit dirty, and then I got the pressure washer out and pressure washed the decks, and my pressure washer decided that was it. It died in the arse, and yeah, it's another thing in the bin. But it's good to die in the arse in the boatyard where I can go and buy another one. Surprisingly, my $100 pressure washer from Bunnings in Australia became a $200 pressure washer from Bunnings in New Zealand. I guess that's inflation. So the decks got cleaned up, cleaning a lot of scum off, got the solar panels working again. My wind generator was no longer working. It was turning, but it just didn't generate any power, so I wasn't sure what's going on there. It's not a job which was urgent, so just needed to chunk my way through the urgent jobs. Decided on getting into the boat jobs and grinding. So I had got the big angle grinder, small angle grinder, and ended up discovering. And again, Dan came over and I was doing some grinding, and I don't think they're that keen on the grinding, but I was fairly deep in the yard. And he introduced me to titanium paint scrapers, which are fucking amazing. Like, best tool I've used for getting paint off. Brilliant. Again, bought them at Bunnings. I think they sell them at most paint shops, but I'd never discovered these before. But if you're scraping a hole, metal hole, titanium paint scrapers are brilliant. A lot of hard work, but they rip the paint off, and they're great on anti-foul. They're great for paint that's pretty rough. So yeah, I really got stuck into getting all that paint off. Better than grinding, and probably a lot less toxic because I was grinding a combination of primer and build coats, anti-foul that's been on there for years. So yeah, I had to get the keel back to raw metal. So yeah, that helped a lot. And then all I had to do was a light sand once I got it down to make it nice and smooth. And then I put a primer coat of paint on. I was using Carbogard, and I used their buff base, which seemed to be a pretty good primer. And then I went with the Carbogard 636 light grey primer, and I used that as a build coat. So I built up the keel to give it I probably got about 4 coats on. And then I put anti-foul over the top of that. So I think I got about 6 coats of anti-foul on because I had plenty of anti-foul at the time. But in hindsight, I think I probably should have run the anti-foul straight over the top of the build coat when it was still a bit sticky. I let it dry off, and maybe not the best course of action. Seemed to work all right, and I've been using Petite Vivid anti-foul black aluminium boat. So we'll see how that goes. I've used it before. The last time I came out, I used Jolton. Yeah, so this time I'm going back to Petite Vivid. I was going to try and get some Silac, which is the Hempel's product. So I think next time I come out, I'll probably strip the hull clean again, and I'll probably go with the Hempel Silac. I've still got to do a bit more research and find it. So I couldn't find it this time, and looked at a couple other products I had in New Zealand as well. But yeah, so got the Carbogard on. It was still a good product. It was easy to work with. It was reasonably priced. And the bottom looked pretty sweet. Anti-fouled everything up, including the wind vane at the back, or the rudder of the wind vane. My rudder got loads of coats, and I ended up, I was going to do prop speed, ended up going back to just using anti-foul, which I've done for the last 30 years. I mean, on a yacht, it doesn't, prop hardly gets used. So I tend to get about a season out of it before the anti-foul comes off, and by then I'm ready to put another coat on anyway. So yeah, working through my jobs, and yeah, I started ringing around for chain, and oh my God, the saga of finding chain. Trying to work it out. Like I have an old windlass. It's forward windlass it's called, and it's very much like an old Muir, and it may be the previous company to Muir. I'm not sure, but on the windlass Gypsy, there should be marking on there to tell you what chain you've got. So there's no marking. And that threw the chain people into a bit of a spin. They couldn't then help me. Couldn't get chain locally, or could get one, but it was none available. And I was looking at a 10mm short link, and they weren't sure whether that exactly what I had. So, I end up, one day just going, stuff it. I can't, chain's going to cost me $3,000, maybe more. So I thought, I'll just take the car, I'll drive down to Auckland, I'll go to a couple of these different places, I'll take the Gypsy, and I'll find what fits. In the end, we worked out I actually had 3/8 chain, not 10mm short link. So it was American 3/8. It's probably been put on over in the States, or it was put on in Europe. And there was no 3/8 short link in New Zealand, or even the Southern Hemisphere, I was advised. So found the next best thing, and my gypsy was a little bit worn, so that was a benefit to me in getting the right chain. And I'll go into chain a bit in another episode because it's a whole subject that people should spend a bit of time on. But yeah, suffice to say there was way too many choices for chain, and a lot of it was garbage or potentially garbage. And I even talked to people who had chain snap when they were up in whether at Maverna Reef, had chain snap. I mean, the last place you want your chain to snap is in the middle of a storm on a reef in the middle of the ocean. And yeah, that happened to somebody. It's like, frightening to think that could possibly happen. So whilst going through this process, I went from L grade to the best possible grade I could buy. I thought, fuck this, I'm going to buy the best chain I could get. And I spent an extra week looking at chains, and eventually, spent good money on a certified Italian chain. At the same time, I started going through all my crew negotiations. So I was talking with Harry from Melbourne, and Harry from Melbourne turned into Harriet from Melbourne. So a mate of mine, Paul, had a friend, and mentioned this last year before going to, before I went over to Europe. And when I came back, I said, like if your friend still wants to go sailing, I talked to him. And then, ended up talking to Harriet on the phone. So, and Harriet had done sailing, but no ocean sailing, and wanted to sail somewhere. So it was at this stage, it's either going to be Tonga or Fiji or Vanuatu. And so, sort of committed to Harriet that I'm going to go sailing. And I thought, fuck, if I'm going to take one person who hasn't sailed and a chick, I should take more than one person. I should take a couple of people, make it easy for that person. It probably would have been easier all up for me just to have soloed, which was what I was going to do. I was in that sort of soloing mood. But sometimes it's also nice to have a crew member and meet some new people. But I felt that, just dragging a new person into ocean sailing and 1,000 nautical miles, a person I didn't know, had no experience sailing with, haven't always had great experiences in the ocean with just a chick on board. So I decided to beef out the crew, and I ended up negotiating with Fiona from Wellington and Emile, a French guy who was travelling around, who was a dive instructor and free diving instructor. So that rounded out my crew. So that took a lot more energy than I had really wanted or planned. And the other problem was my boat jobs were taking longer than I anticipated. My boat jobs are pushing back not 1 week but 2 weeks, and then I had some sagas with my heat exchanger. And, that threw me probably 2 weeks behind schedule. What I'd hoped to do, and, also the boat jobs were a lot harder. The keel took a week by itself, grinding, priming, painting, doing all the through holes, doing everything yourself on a 45-foot boat. It's time consuming, it's hard work. Then you're also going into town, finding supplies. You're just stopping to have a break and, going to town to have a beer because you're shattered. So, my ambitions of knocking it over in a few weeks turned into probably close to 6 weeks, I guess. But, I kept the crew in the loop, and Harriet rolled her leave back a couple of times. And then, we finally sort of, got the boat in the water. But I'll go through some of the other little projects I had. I had, some major dramas with the heat exchanger, and I ended up finding a guy who was amazing, like great mechanic, brilliant mechanic. And, I'll mention him in a separate episode because he deserves an episode just by himself. And if you've got problems, he's definitely the guy you want to go to. He's fucking brilliant. Him and a mate of his who was a welder. I wouldn't have been able to go sailing without those guys. So very, very grateful. My old clunker engine, which I was going to do valve stem seals, he advised me not to. He said, it's still smoking. But I'm probably going to, I think next season I'm going to probably do the valve stem seals and the injectors. So I'm going to do a little bit of an overhaul. I think that'll be, because I won't have all the other big jobs on. I'll just target the motor a bit more. So it's still smoking a bit, but it could potentially be injector pump, injectors, valve stem seals. So there's a couple of things going on there, but I mean, the motor still runs perfectly. It purrs like a kitten, just coughs like a smoker with a 50-year habit when it starts until it settles down. So thank you for joining me. It's good to be back on the boat. It's good to be chunking through boat jobs, exhausted every day, absolutely shattered, covered in shit. Clothes are just getting ruined. Every day I'm throwing another set of clothes out because I'm, getting paint on them or Sikaflex on them or something, or I've thrown a heap of stuff out for mould and bedding as well. But it's all part of owning a boat, and maybe I didn't prepare it well enough when I left. But yeah, again, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.